Do you struggle with overwhelm? Meaning that you have days where there's so much stress, there's so much being placed upon you that you don't really know where to focus your energy. And so you end up in these states where the only thing you want to do is either freeze and shut down or avoid the problem altogether. And this creates conflict because you know that it's keeping you from reaching the body you want, having the health you want, having the energy you need, and reaching your ultimate goals of success. If that resonates with you and you're ready to change this pattern forever, we're going to show you an 8-step process that you can use today to identify this pattern of overwhelm and break it forever. My name's Brian Pickowitz.
And I'm Lindsay Pickowitz, and we are the head coaches and the co-founders at the Fitness Project, where we primarily focus on building fit, healthy leaders. Now, if you yourself are a leader, well, then you know that this pattern does not serve you. And yet, you still fall into it more often than you want to. Whenever you start to get overwhelmed and things start to stack up, you feel yourself falling into that desire to just do nothing, to shut off, to shut down. And sometimes it probably takes something external to shake you and wake you up before you get back to it. Now, again, you and I both know that this is not sustainable, which is why you're here. But we really want to help you break this pattern. And like Brian said, really for good, make this something that you never have to struggle with again. Of course, you're going to feel the emotion of stress or overwhelm, but you don't have to shut down. You can learn how to manage this in a really, really healthy way so that you never get to that point ever again.
Now, today, the reason why we're sharing this is because, well, really twofold. One is it's a pattern that a lot of our clients struggle with, especially when they're pushing against what they've known for so long. And I think that that's really important, is that this is a pattern you've conditioned. If you get overwhelmed and shut down, or if you get overwhelmed and turn to food or alcohol or something else to soothe, the first piece to understand is that this is just how you've conditioned yourself to manage stress. Now, the definition of stress is when the demands that are being placed upon us exceed our capacity, right? And that demand might be something that is real or might be perceived, right? You might have this thought about all the things you believe you need to do, and that might extend beyond what you perceive as your current capacity. And that capacity could be your time, your mental bandwidth, your energy, your skills. And so by understanding that this is just a pattern, this is something you've conditioned over time, that actually gives you the courage, the strength, and the awareness to know that you can change it, right? Because you can change anything. And the second part of this is actually understanding that this is a pattern in our lives. This is something that we've had to work a lot on in our relationships, especially as business partners, because Lindsay, more specifically, has really struggled with this. And so what we want to do is, instead of saying, here are the 8 steps, we're going to show you the 8 steps through story. So you can see the arc of transformation that someone might go through. You can identify where you are at in the arc as well. And then you can start to practice this process of conditioning a new way forward. And so, Lindsay, let's talk about this. What was your old pattern of overwhelm? What used to happen, and what's kind of the old way you would handle overwhelm or stress?
Yeah. When I first, well, actually, we'll go back. This has been was a pattern for my whole life, like since I was a little kid. I would put off and procrastinate homework assignments, piano lessons, practice, etc., until the last possible minute. And then I would feel like I had to cram as many practice sessions or homework assignments into 1 hour as possible. And I would realize I couldn't do it. And I would get so overwhelmed that I would just cry. And that's what I remember as a kid. And then somebody would come save me, and I'd turn in the homework assignment and maybe not get the best grade. But that was a consistent pattern with everything. That pattern stuck with me through college and then through starting a business. And once we started, well, I started my coaching business after yours, but we hadn't had the Fitness Project yet. And that pattern continued forward to the point where every time I came up with a new idea or new project, that creativity would slowly die as I actually started to get into the work and realize how much I had to do in order to achieve the outcome or bring the project to fruition. And so kind of was the same thing. I'd come to you until I was overwhelmed, and then you'd kind of fix it for me or help me with it. I didn't necessarily see it as something I could change. I just thought of it as, things are hard, it's challenging, and this is just what happens. But once we got into business together, then it became much more apparent that it was an actual pattern and a problem that needed to be corrected, because it would show up not just when we had a big project or something we were working on, but it started to really show up in our dialogue more often than not. You would get really upset about something or frustrated about something, not necessarily frustrated at me directly, but I would start to feel stressed and start to feel like, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do. And I'd just get to the point where I was so overwhelmed and uncertain of how to fix things that I would just feel like a deer in headlights, completely just shut off. And you would start saying to me wait, hello, are you home? And that was just a consistent, probably 3 times a week type of behavior. And then I just shut down for an hour at least, if not more.
Well, and it would cause conflict, because if you think of the 3 patterns of how people handle stress, you either fight, you flee, or you freeze. And I'm a fighter, baby. I want to solve the problem. I'm here to win. And that pattern of success for me, which is I see the problem and I attack it, is not productive when the other person's pattern is shut down. And in our business, we're 50-50, right? So it's not like Brian is the ultimate say. A lot of my skills complement yours and your skills complement mine. So there would be times where I would be leading the charge on maybe the goal or the project of what we're working on, but your skills were necessary for marketing or project management or building the vision around it, the details, which is really where you're the greatest. And because you were, in hindsight, solving more problems than what we were actually talking about in the moment.
Right.
That's what was overwhelming, is you were thinking on step 15 or 25 or 30, or you were hyper focused on this one micro detail that was not essential at that moment. It would cause this conflict. And then that conflict would lead to frustration between me and you. And then we would actually, the way to describe it is we would end up pulling the car over, right? Instead of being in a car where you're driving to your destination, we'd have to pull over the car, right? Okay, or is everyone good here, right? Versus, hey, we're moving towards the target. How are we doing this together? And so this problem was so pervasive in our work for multiple years.
Yeah.
And we would push forward. And luckily, we were serving people in a way that allowed us to grow, because the client was always the focus. But when we talk about innovation, talk about growth, talk about adding new team members, when we talk about that next level, it would take us way too long to get on the same page. In ownership,
That's true.
I would get so frustrated that I would also have my own negative habits, right? So I had to work on mine.
Which we talked about in a different podcast.
Yeah, I talk about how I handled my frustration. I had to recondition that pattern. But then you had to work on yours.
Yeah.
So tell us more then, when did this become something you were first aware of? When we talk about awareness being the first step, right? You have to identify the problem in order to change it. So when did you really identify that this is something that has to change, or just even identify that you had a pattern of overwhelm?
I'm wondering when I actually first realized it, because again, I share the background of how long I struggled with it, because I want people to know that it's not just, oh yeah, life got a little harder and I developed this pattern, which means you can break it. But for me, and for you, even if it's a decades old pattern, you can still break it. That's why I share that. But when I actually recognized that it was something that I could shift or improve upon, it was sometime in 2021, 2022, because 2021 was the most stressful period, and it was also not the most challenging period externally speaking. I didn't have as many responsibilities as I have now. I didn't have the demand that I have now, but I was so ill-equipped emotionally to handle the stress that was currently on my plate as the second year in business together, that's where it became apparent that what I was experiencing was not sustainable. Meaning if I keep doing this, I am going to exit this business and it's not going to go anywhere. Like I won't be able to handle it and have a good quality of life because I would get so stressed thinking about so many things I had to do that I didn't have time for. And I would shut down and feel just exhausted. It wasn't just like I shut down for an hour. It was like I felt exhausted. And I was like, the business isn't even that big yet. We're not even anywhere close to our goals. And I'm already exhausted. And so that's when it started to become, I didn't do anything about it yet, but that's when it started to become really obvious that, ooh, like, I don't really know how to change this, but this is not going to be useful. I can't keep doing this.
What were some other patterns that would show up when you were overwhelmed besides shutdown and exhaustion? How might you have also handled that stress at times?
In 2021 specifically, I gained 10 pounds while being a fitness coach and a business owner in the fitness industry because I would stress eat peanut butter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that I was so incredibly aware of, but I could not figure out how to break. So I was one that would stress eat. That was really the only thing. I would maybe go do some healthy things, but I ended up getting so stressed, so overwhelmed that my typical patterns weren't helping.
Mm-hmm. And stress eating peanut butter might not sound like the most impactful thing. It's not candy, but it's incredibly calorie dense.
Mm-hmm.
You would also have inflammation because peanut butter is not very healthy for you, at least if it's not organic peanut butter. Mm-hmm. So like all the hydrogenated oils,
Yep.
the extra oils that were in it, the seed
Yeah,
oils.
I had breakouts really bad. That was more of just a negative consequence of the behavior.
Miss your period.
Yes, I would miss my period or it would be delayed. It sounds silly, but I would drink so much coffee, not because I needed energy, because I was tired, but more because it was just something like comforting and sweet. But I'd put, what is it called? Dairy-free, like really processed creamer, not real cream. And that does have a lot of hydrogenated oils. And so I would get breakouts, inflammation. Like, yeah, it had lots of bad consequences
Yes.
to my stress habits.
And so there's awareness around it.
Yep.
When did you hit threshold, though? Because the first step is identifying it, but the second step to breaking any pattern is threshold, which is when we recognize that the pattern that we are living in is costing us something. Correct. So you'll never change a pattern until it becomes something that you can no longer tolerate. Mm-hmm. And that means it's costing you something, because at the current moment where you're in a pattern, it's meeting one of your needs. It's meeting a goal, right? That's the only reason why we keep it around. Even if it sucks, even if you hate it, it's still meeting your goals. That's why you keep doing it. If it didn't meet your goals, you wouldn't do it, right? So it's meeting your current needs and values. But once we reach that point where we identify that it's costing us something and it's too painful, that's when we reach threshold and we start to change. So for you, what was that threshold point? Were there any points where you said, this has to change today, or this is something I must master? What was that point for you?
Two different ones. The first one was in that 2021 stressful period when I realized that I was now over 140 pounds because I had lived in the 130s for years after bodybuilding. And so I had hit over 140. And that was the first, like, you got to handle your stress better. It wasn't clear that it was the shutdown pattern, but it was, you got to handle your stress better, girl. Like, this is not acceptable. The real shutdown pattern threshold was getting to the point where we were in a business conference. We were at Business Mastery with Tony Robbins, and they asked us to do a very simple math problem. Very, very simple. It was like multiply revenue by 10%, multiply this by that. It was very simple. And I just started to feel overwhelmed because I didn't have our numbers in front of us, or I didn't feel like it wasn't perfect. It wasn't correct. And in my mind, it had to be perfect. It had to be correct. The data had to be correct. Otherwise, it didn't matter. It didn't make sense. And you can see and feel, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see how that stress manifests in your body, just the way I'm describing it, because that's how it felt. And so I just started escalating to the point where I just, boom, shut off completely. It's like, I can't do this.
And this is a very simple problem, right? It's just learning the exercise so you can put it into your business. And it doesn't matter if the data is accurate. It's about learning how to do it. And as someone who loves data and loves numbers and loves the accounting of business, I was moving through the problem. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This makes a lot of sense. And I look over and you just see the amount of overwhelm that you are experiencing. And you're not communicating on the problem. You're not communicating what's happening. You're not asking for help. You're just shutting down. It's like you were dropping dropping through levels of like like if you dropped from the 10th floor of your house to the ninth, if you had a building, maybe not your house, no one has 10 floors in their house, but you're in the 10th floor of a building, and then you drop and you drop and you drop it. Each one, when we're trying to work from it, you're just getting lower and lower and lower, to the point where we're in this $10,000 master class, right? It's a $10,000 seminar for 4 days, 5 days of work, and we're trying to get so much out of it that you completely shut off and start crying. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm so overwhelmed. Blah. And it was really challenging. I got very frustrated. I did not lash out. I did not take it out. I did not become irrational, but we're engaged in this, and it's a virtual event too. So we're in our house together, and everything's happening on the actual, we'll say, Zoom call or the actual event, and we have to almost like step out, hit mute, hit pause. What are we doing?
Yep.
What's going on here? And that was really the threshold point where we both became aware of the pattern
that we had to course correct.
Yes, we both. It was, hey, this is kind of what happens before, but this is actually the problem. And I'm here being compassionate and loving and working with you. I'm still frustrated because I'm a human, but I'm like, hey, like I'm trying to help you through this, and you're not giving me any kind of feedback or response or acknowledgement of what you need.
Yep.
So that was like our threshold point as a unit, and then we started to change it. Is that pretty accurate?
Yep. And before that point, before we went to that event, we had gone to a different group event, like a small mastermind event, and there was a mentor of ours there and a friend of ours named Amanda, and she had dealt with overwhelm and kind of talked about it in different pieces of content and such. And I knew that overwhelm and managing stress was a challenge. So I remember asking her, hey, how do you kind of keep yourself from shutting down completely? Like when you're stressed, how do you keep yourself engaged? How do you work through that? And the feedback she had given me at the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022 before this event was part of it is understanding that it gets to the point where it's not a logical, I'm choosing to relax anymore. I need to recharge. It becomes physical, like your nervous system shuts down. Your nervous system is off now. She said the most important thing you can do first when that happens, if you want to break that pattern, is re-engage. Keep your nervous system, keep yourself on, which I know we're going to talk about more. But as she explained this to me, I started to feel a little bit less hopeless or frustrated by the pattern. It started to become a little bit more tackleable, if you will. So I had been practicing that. I had been trying to keep myself on a little bit more. But then again, the pattern really reached a head at that second event where it's like, okay, I've been trying to dabble here and there and improve this a little bit. But then it became really apparent, like I have to actually focus on breaking this pattern if I want it to be out of my life. It couldn't be something that I dabbled with and just tried to handle a little better. I was like, I have to put all my resources into breaking this, into building a new way to react and not letting it get to this point. So that's really when that threshold happened and things started to pivot and we started to really, I started to really change.
And what Lindsay's also describing here is the third step, right? So there was threshold, but through your work with Amanda and then you hiring your own coach to actually help you with this, right? Because you hired your own performance coach at this point that helped you attack this problem, you started to then normalize it, right? So one of the things that we want to do, if we identify it, we hit threshold, before we go and change it, we want to normalize it. We want to reduce the judgment, because removing the judgment allows us to make peace with the pattern versus saying, I get overwhelmed and I shut down. I am the problem. We label ourselves and we beat ourselves up and we feel so frustrated and irritated with ourselves. And whenever there's judgment laced with a problem that we're trying to solve, especially when it's a pattern, it really becomes sticky, right? That's the way one of our mentors describes it. It's a sticky situation because we become more entwined with the pattern. Because when the pattern shows up, instead of being curious and learning it and seeing it as something that's solvable, if we judge it, we start becoming closer to the pattern, right? And then we start to label ourselves. And once we label ourselves as the person who is that versus the person who's experiencing that, we start to become more entwined with the pattern and we can't see it as well. So through this process, you started to normalize it. Hey, I experience overwhelm. This is something that's happening. And that's okay. I can change it. But once we normalize it, then we can actually get through it. What was that like for you? Was that pretty accurate to how it happened, or was there anything else that you did to start making peace with it before you actually got the opportunity to break it?
I think that after reaching threshold, there is a little bit of deflation that happens, starting to feel deflated or defeated. I think that's normal. I was speaking to a new client of ours the other day about it, and I could tell that when she first was discussing and kind of reaching her threshold of like, I do this to my family, I have to wait for my husband to come and shake me out of it. I was like, I really resonate with that. And I could tell she felt deflated in the moment of maybe owning that or sharing it. And that's how it felt for me too. But then you say, okay, and what am I going to do about it? And the quicker that you can get yourself into a more empowered place or a more courageous place to say, okay, I accept this. Let's tackle it. Let's work on this, the better. So I remember just feeling the deflate, feeling the defeat and the frustration, but then just saying, okay, this isn't acceptable. So let's chip away at this. Like I can do this. I have the tools for this. I teach people things like this, and if I learn it, I'm going to be able to help so many other people. So I started wrapping a better story around it.
You found purpose.
Yes.
Right. And
exactly.
finding purpose, understanding what's on the other side. Right? Because if there's nothing on the other side, then there's no reason to change.
Yeah.
Right? If we don't see that there's a more compelling future after we break through a negative habit, and there's something that's keeping us from experiencing, and that might be the impact, that might be the contribution, that might be the growth. If we don't see that there's something better on the other side of a current habit that's limiting us, we're never going to change.
Very true.
So you have to, again, build a bigger purpose. Your purpose has to be bigger than the current one that the pattern is solving. Right? Yep. So the fourth step, and this is where really things start to change, once you identify the problem, once you start to hit threshold, once you kind of normalize it and you come to peace with it and you build a better story and you find more purpose, then you got to get to work.
Then comes the work.
Then comes the fun part, right? Where all the growth happens.
Maybe.
And so the fourth step is identifying in real time.
Yeah, starting to actually go to war with the pattern in the moment.
Yes, because you're not going to be able to solve, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to get stressed. It's going to keep happening. It's a pattern, right? Which means that whenever you're triggered, whenever there's a cue, there's something that your body starts to feel. There's a state change because your body is bracing for impact. Right? If you think of overwhelm is you're trying to solve multiple problems at the same time because you're afraid that something's going to go wrong. Or you're afraid you're going to miss something. You're going to make a mistake. Yep. If I make that mistake, I'm going to fail. And then, oh my gosh, what will that mean? That's what your brain's doing unconsciously. You're building this unconscious story about what failure or missing the mark means. So your brain gets triggered by something, and therefore you try to solve all these problems. And you're solving them in your head, which makes it really challenging to dissect problems effectively because it's like doing a math equation in your mind.
Basically.
It doesn't work, right? So once you identify it, then you can start changing it. How did you start identifying the problem in real time? What were some patterns that you noticed or some times where it showed up where you're like, oh, I'm at a 10 out of 10. And how did you do that? What were some things you did to recognize the pattern?
Yeah, when you're in the moment, starting to get overwhelmed, the worst thing that you can do is ignore all of the cues leading up to overwhelm. And it's not that you're doing this on purpose, but when you're getting overwhelmed is where you really need to interject. So what I had a pattern of doing before I hit complete overwhelm was kind of indulging in my thoughts, indulging in the idea that I could kind of solve the next problem or get ahead of things by thinking about it first. And this might not make sense without examples. So sometimes you get overwhelmed and you think, oh, I'm going to go for a walk and think about the problem. And let me think through and kind of rehearse what I could do differently or what's going to come next or maybe the sequence of my day. And in the moment, that feels like a really solid idea. That makes a lot of sense to start using your downtime to problem solve. But what it does when you're trying to solve problems in your head and you're indulging in the thoughts and mental rehearsal is if you have a pattern of overwhelm, realistically, you start asking yourself questions that you can't answer. Well, what would I do if this? What would I do if that? And then at some point in the thought train, your brain realizes, oh, I don't know. Like it literally feels like you're hitting walls inside of your head is the best way I can describe it. So that would happen. And the walking is an example that I think others will resonate with. But in the moment, maybe when I'm talking to you, how that looked was you're saying something. My brain is going, oh, well, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't really work. Well, I don't know if that's really going to happen. And so you start bouncing around, hitting walls in your head, and you're not present. And you start having two conversations at the same time. And you start realizing that you can't solve whatever the question is that's coming up. Mm-hmm. Whether it's you saying, well, what do you think about that? Yeah. What do you think? Well, my brain's going, well, how would you do that? Well, what if this happens? And it's like, then you have competing questions you can't answer. And then you're just like stunned. Like, I can't answer the question. I don't know. And so you shut down. Mm-hmm. So what I had to do,
well, and you can think about that too. Shutting down in that moment is not looking like an idiot. Because better to say, I don't really know, versus I wasn't listening to you, or I don't have a good answer. Right? It's a defense mechanism to the combative nature of whatever you're afraid of. Right? So it's starting to
probably.
It's because if we're having a conversation about something and someone's asking you what you think and your brain's been over here, the vulnerable thing is, can you repeat that? I wasn't paying attention. That requires a little bit of courage. But if you're afraid of the response, which at that point you had trained yourself, not even from me, there was a period beforehand where you were in an abusive relationship and that was a conditioned response. Whenever you thought someone was going to angry, you'd shut down.
Yeah.
So that bled into this where it's like a business conversation where, hey, what do you think? And then you're like, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? This is like your area. Like, this is your area. And then that becomes like a fight, right? Mm-hmm. So the I don't know, the shutdown is a defense mechanism to keep you protected. Yeah. So I don't need to tell you that I wasn't listening because then you might not love me. You might get mad at me.
And not to reiterate, but I really want people who are listening to this to feel seen. If that pattern that we just described repeats multiple times, either within a day or within a couple days or within a week, that's where you really sink into hopelessness and defeat, like complete defeat. And that's when I say like you feel shut down. Some people describe it as like I'm like a bump on a log, or I'm just like I'm useless to everyone. Like that's different ways that you could describe it. Usually there's a lot of experiences where you got overwhelmed and you couldn't answer it and you felt dumb over and over and over again, and then you just sink lower and lower. So this is also going to help you avoid that. Mm-hmm. But so I had to I wrote words. Pause, Trevor. So I had to start becoming more aware of those thoughts and seeing them as a cue that, oh, I'm about to start getting overwhelmed. And I had to simultaneously, as I was saying, stop indulging those thoughts, thinking I was going to somehow solve the problem faster if I were to try to think ahead of the problem. And I know for some people that might sound too far away. The alternative is you can start to feel physically the cues of your body. You can start to feel your body giving you signals that you're getting overwhelmed, because here's what happens. You tense or you start to freeze physically, depending on maybe your personal reaction. But you start to like freeze, like movement stops, and your heart rate simultaneously starts to speed up a little bit. Your breath starts to get really shallow and in your chest. I used to have chest pain from just getting overwhelmed. Like I wouldn't be able to get a full breath. So like that's a physical cue that you're getting stressed and overwhelmed. And you might start to sweat depending on you. But for me personally, I had to start noticing when my breath would get shallow, when I started to feel my body stop moving, because I'd start to freeze. And that helped me to identify I'm starting to get overwhelmed before I was at a 10 out of 10. Because once you're a 10 out of 10, it's more like a recoup process. Like you kind of have to realize, oh, I got completely overwhelmed there. Okay, I got to forgive myself. All right, it's okay. But it's like it takes a lot longer once you get to 10 out of 10.
Yeah. You would when you would reach 10 out of 10 at that point, you would usually remove yourself.
You had to remove and reset.
I need 5 minutes. Give me a moment. And then you would come back and we talk about it, which is one of the next steps. So the identification, 3 things you can identify if you're in a state of overwhelm is first, what's your physiology? What's happening in your body? Right? Are you sweating? Are you nervous? Do you feel tightness in your chest? Second thing is, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on multiple problems? Are you focusing on how to be perfect with solving one problem? Are you focusing on a problem that doesn't even exist? What are you focused on in that moment? Most likely, if you're focusing on multiple things, good sign that you're starting to get overwhelmed. Third thing you want to focus on is, what are you saying to yourself in your head? What are you making this mean? Are you saying to yourself, well, that never happened. Well, that's not the right problem. Or, oh my God, I can't do that. Or, oh my gosh, I'm starting to get overwhelmed. That's a pretty good indication that you're getting overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And you can even hear the physiology goes up, right? I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. Right? It's a peak.
Yeah.
Right? So these are 3 signs that you might be in that
Reaching
state. And that's what you want to build awareness around. So once we identify the state, the 5th step is to change it.
Yes.
Right? You can change your state. What a wonderful concept by going to those 3 points. You can change your state by changing your physiology. You can change your state by changing what you focus on. And you can change your state by changing what you're saying to yourself or what you're making this mean. Now, there's some really easy ways that you can do this. Physiology is easy. We can breathe. We can speak. We can go for a walk. We can separate ourselves. There's that space. We could do something more active and big. The bigger the move, the bigger the change. We can also change what we focus on, right? If you focus on a problem, you're going to feel it. One of the easiest ways to change your focus is to focus on what's right in front of you. Use your eyes. Look at something. See the person. That brings you back into the present moment. And the third thing you can change is what you're saying to yourself. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. It's going to be okay. Just focus on this right now. It's okay. The way that you would do this, Linz, manifested with kind of a pattern of all 3. But what would you do when we first started working on this and you were getting overwhelmed? There was a way that you would actually talk to me that would help.
Yeah. The first thing it's really helpful when the person you're with most often understands this pattern and you share it with them. That's more of a separate note, because if you start doing this, you might look like a crazy person if the person in front of you doesn't understand what you're doing. But if you share it in advance, it's very helpful and they can support you. That said, when I first got the initial feedback from Amanda that you need to re-engage, like you need to turn your body back on, one of the things that I would start saying to myself as I was getting overwhelmed and starting to feel myself shut down is I'd say, turn on, instead of, I can't, I don't know. Like that would be like more of the language going on in my head. So I would consciously use that anchor phrase of turn on, turn back on, because I had that visual cue, or it felt visual language, to turn my body back on, to not freeze and shut down. And so as I said turn on in my head, then physically I would open my body up and I would start to say out loud some words like, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, but I'm going to keep talking through it so that I can keep my body on and stay engaged. Now you see, if the person in front of you doesn't know what you're doing, you sound like a crazy person. But it actually works.
Or you sound like someone who's trying to break a pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, if your coworkers know that, if your employees know that, if you're a business owner by yourself, who cares?
Yeah,
but
talk to yourself.
Talk to yourself. But I literally had to talk to you/to myself to keep my body on. That's what I had to do to break the pattern. And it worked because, like that mentor was saying, it reaches a point where it's not really a logical choice. It's not something in your head where you can just be like, oh, I'm good. And everything is good. Like you actually physically have to tell your body, I'm staying on. It's all good. I'm feeling overwhelmed, but I'm going to stay engaged. Instead of when I would shut down, it would just be like, I don't know. I don't know. Again, like deer in the headlights. So just starting to practice that in real time That was huge for changing state.
Now, I'll add this. If you're on the other side, maybe you are the male in the situation, right? Or the female. I think that this is very common for females to experience. Men tend to be more push. I'm not saying that's always the case, but just some of the patterns I've recognized with people. But if you are someone who shuts down and you're on the other side as the partner or the business partner or the leader or just the friend in the corner, the most important thing you can do is hold space and ask, what do you need? What do you need from me right now? Okay, what do you need? What do you need?
You like pull them in.
What do you need?
Pull them in.
What do you need from me? Okay, what do you need from me right now? Can I lead? Like, that was one of the questions I would ask. Can I lead right now? Like, is it okay if I kind of take the reins? Because we're both kind of trying to take the reins on something, and that's why you're trying to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. Can I lead us right now? Is that okay?
You stop trying to fix it.
Yes. Bingo. So stop trying to fix your partner. Stop trying to fix the problem and ask first, what do you need? What they need is what's going to fix the problem.
They do.
Right? Whatever that is, right? I need space. I need you to just give me a moment. In the better that you get at asking that question, what you'll find is the person moves faster. As we started to do this, Lindsay moved so much faster to a solution. You know what? I just want to let you know, I am feeling overwhelmed. And it's okay. Give me a moment.
Yep.
Or, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can you say that one more time? Or I'm overwhelmed. Can we just focus on this problem right now?
Yep.
It was very progressive in the way that we were able to move.
Much
and
faster.
now at this point, it's been almost 3 years. Almost 3 years of working on this. Probably almost 5, if you really count like when we started working on this. But now it's almost a non-problem.
Yeah.
Because if it's showing up, we're aware of it at a 2 or a 4.
Yeah, it's so...
Right? A 10 out of 10 is when you shut down and you need the space. What you were describing of vocalizing it was like an 8 out of 10. Ooh, I don't want to shut down, so I'm going to engage with you and tell you that I'm feeling like I want to shut down. I want to run away. I'm letting you know this, and I would say, okay, what do you need? What do we need to do? It's okay. Right? No judgment. It's okay. I understand. It's okay. I understand how you're feeling. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to take a moment? What's the best? And what's great about this is we stopped pulling the car over to the side of the road. The car is no longer pulled on the side of the road. We might be slowing down, but what would happen in the past is you're starting to shut down, and then I'm frustrated and saying, well, come on. Like, we're supposed to be solving a problem together. Like, this is the thing. And then I would get irritated and frustrated, and then I'm the driver, so we're pulling over the side of the road. Now we might have to slow down a little bit.
Much better.
But once we slow down, we can move fast. So again, on the other side, you're a partner. That's the whole part, right? You're a teammate. So you're trying to be productive. Now, it's both people working in unison. Because if you are the person who is the shutdown and you have a lovely partner who wants to help you, you have to take ownership and responsibility for the desire to change. And after the actual business event, that's what happened. We didn't say this, but when we went through Business Mastery and you had that shutdown, we had a long conversation. I sat down with you and said, I can't be with you in business if this is the way you're going to handle this. Like, you need to change this. It's a must.
Yep.
I can't deal with someone who does this consistently.
Yep.
So both parties have to be willing to change, and the person on their side has to be open to it. And the part of being willing to change and being a partner is, as the person who has a problem with it, you have to be compassionate and loving to let them go through the experience. Right? You have to be compassionate and loving to let them go through the experience. And I'll share this last piece because one of the things that I did was also point out when you were shutting down. Not in a rude way, but I feel like you're shutting down right now. Right? When that was starting to happen, when we were identifying the change in state, identifying some of the cues, we'd be working on a problem and be like, I feel like you're shutting down.
Yeah, that helped with awareness.
So again, you can do this as a party, but the most important thing is that your center has to be out of love and compassion, desire to improve, not out of judgment and frustration. Like, you're shutting down again. Why are you doing this? That's stupid. You're an idiot. You're not going to help someone. Versus, hey, I feel like you're kind of shutting down right now. What are we doing? Can you tell me more about what's happening? And that's how you start to give that person that next step to change. So if step 5, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, not specifically. I was going to move on to step 6, because once you start identifying it in real time, you start to feel yourself going into overwhelm before you're fully there. And once you recognize it, you change your state either by keeping yourself on, vocalizing, starting to breathe deeper, or something to bring you back into the present and keep you on. Then from there, you still have to bring yourself down, right? So starting to change your state, starting to keep yourself on, that keeps you from getting to a 10, but it doesn't necessarily de-escalate you. Because when you're starting to get overwhelmed, think of it as a build-up, as an escalation. So you need to de-escalate. You need to bring yourself back down. And the first question that you want to ask yourself is, what is most important right now? Sounds really simple and really silly, because at that moment, everything feels important and also nothing feels important because you're just overwhelmed and you're scattered and you just don't know. But the truth is, you got to this point because you were trying to solve multiple problems at the same time. You were trying to answer a bunch of questions that have no answer right now. And so you've forgotten what's actually the most important priority in this moment, which is why you're getting overwhelmed with lots of little tasks and things you can't complete. So if you just simply identify, which is step 6, identify the top priority in this moment, then immediately you'll be focused on a target again instead of scattered with your focus, which is overwhelming by nature. So identify the top priority in that moment, which probably means you got to clarify what is actually most important right now. Hang on. What am I trying to accomplish? What is the one thing? And then you might have to resolve some things that you can't fix or you can't focus on right now, either by writing them down, or in our case, we might have been saying it out loud, like, hey, all we're trying to do is build the marketing plan for today. That's most important. We don't need to figure out what we're doing in 3 months or how our camera should look or whatever. So there's certain things that you're going to resolve that you either can't fix or focus on right now. And then from there, you can solve for the top priority. So think about it like clarify, resolve, and then solve. Clarify top priority, resolve for what you can't fix, and then solve the problem in front of you that is the top priority. And if you just direct your focus, you're going to feel like you de-escalate and refocus, which is really what you're looking for when you're overwhelmed.
And this might be where you start using journaling or power listing, something that puts your thoughts out into the open. One of the things I tell people is journaling is really the exercise of mental math for what's important in your life. So try to solve a math equation in your head. One of the things I hate is when I hear parents tell their kids that they don't need to know long division because you have calculators. It's like, oh, that's really interesting, because you're never going to solve a complex problem in your life. Long division, for example, teaches you how to solve for infinite variables or variables that are unknown to arrive at a conclusion. It's a way of thinking. So if you did that on a piece of paper when you were in high school, you can't think with a calculator in your life, right? You can't think about all the variables for solving in your life.
Not until you have a Neuralink in your brain.
Yeah. Or if you want to go to ChatGPT, and even ChatGPT is you talking through the exercise with an external source. So make yourself the external source by putting a pen on a piece of paper and ask yourself, what are the things I'm focused on? What are all the things that are going on inside my head? What's important right now? Is this within my control or outside of my control? And then you can create a list of what's the hierarchy of importance and then start working. But there's some things that are going on inside your head that you're not even conscious of, that are laying dormant, or you're conscious of but you just don't know how to fix, that you need to extrapolate and put outside of yourself so you can solve it. Because once it's there, you can see it, and now you can start moving things around and understanding more about what you're focusing on and what you can do.
There was a client that I was speaking with fairly recently, but she was talking about how she felt so scattered and so overwhelmed. And I just put out the question, when was the last time that you kind of paused from all these different things on your plate and just reflected? Like just sat and thought with a pen and paper in hand. Like, when was the last time you did that? I said, I don't know. I was like, Well, no wonder you're overwhelmed. You're trying to solve everything and keep 3 different calendars in your brain.
Yeah.
You got to put them on paper. You got to identify your top priorities. You have to de-escalate. Otherwise, you just stay at that overwhelmed place.
Yeah. And you could think about it. Imagine this. Imagine if you had 100 tabs open on your computer and you were a crazy person like Lindsay used to be. Lindsay has infinite tabs. And I'm like,
Now
"What
I
are you doing?"
only keep like 9 open at a time, but it
Yeah.
used to be like 20.
But if you think about that, those tabs, like as you look at your monitor, they become shorter and shorter and shorter, and you can't even read them. You can't even read what the
true.
title of the tab is. So you have to click through 10 tabs to figure out the one you're looking for. That's happening inside your head if you're not taking it outside of yourself.
Yeah.
You're having all these tabs open in your brain, and if you don't have a calendar, if you don't have a schedule, if you don't journal or reflect, if you don't have some way to externalize it, then you're keeping those tabs open in your brain.
Yep.
So when we talk about identify the top priority, you're really just closing all the tabs. You're saying which tab is the most important right now. And then
That's a
you're
good one.
saying, hey, these other tabs, I know that I'm going to focus on in the future, so I'm going to put them somewhere. Right? Maybe I just make a note for myself to focus on that in a week or in an hour or as soon as this task is done. But this is the tab that matters most. And then you go to war with that tab. You go to war with that top priority and you make it your focus. And then once you've done that, step 7 is you celebrate. You have to begin to train yourself to celebrate when you break a bad habit. Because oftentimes the current pattern is judgment. If you have a negative habit of stress eating and you stop halfway through the bag of chips, if you don't celebrate, you're going to judge yourself and say, you're such an idiot. I can't believe you did this again. Can't believe you ate half the bag. Versus if your old pattern was eat the whole thing, you have to say, hey, good job, we stopped. We have to recondition a new reward. And the way you do that is by celebrating. So one of the things that we would do after Lindsay would have these patterns of overwhelm and, hey, I'm overwhelmed right now. Okay, what do you need? We'd solve the problem. We'd get done a meeting that in the past might take an hour and a half in like 30 minutes. Even though that pattern was there, we'd get done and be like, hey, good job.
Yeah. High five.
High five. We'd give each other a high five. We'd say, hey, good job. You did a great job there. I really appreciate that. So we'd celebrate together. And that's what allowed it to be a productive change.
It's true.
Because then we recognize that there's a reward associated with everything that we just went through.
And celebrating was not easy at first because the pattern was still really sticky and it did still take a while. Still took time to work through it. But every time we one of us would remember, hey, okay, that was better. What normally would take an hour and a half took an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 10 minutes. Like we tried to find little ways to celebrate progress because it didn't go from an hour and a half meeting to a 30-minute meeting. It didn't go from overwhelmed to highly effective. It was progressive, as you said at the beginning. But every little bit of progress should be a celebration as well.
It's so important because we live in a world where if we don't get the outcome, it's not worth it. It's like, well, you did get the outcome. Even if it was 10% better, it's an outcome. It's an outcome that was better than what you did before.
It's true.
So celebrating is so important. And so as you see this whole process, step number 1, identify the problem, identify the pattern, identify that it's something. Step 2 is hit threshold. You have to hit threshold and you have to decide that this has to change. This must change. It's costing me too much. Step 3 is normalize it. Make it not as sticky by removing the judgment. Step number 4 is identify in real time. Start to build awareness around some of your triggers and cues. Step 5 is change your state. If you recognize you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, I got to do something. I got to go for a walk. I have to change what I'm focusing on. I have to change what I'm saying to myself. I have to speak it out loud. Then we can start identifying the top priority, resolve what we can't solve, and then start attacking that top priority. And then lastly, we celebrate it. But there's one last thing that we do once we start to see all 7 of these steps and we actually hit our mark. But there's one last step that we have to do once we've walked through all 7 steps and we've realized that we've successfully hit our mark. And that is?
Condition it. Now, everything that we just shared leads up to this point because you're going to have to keep practicing in real time. The thing is, there's a hack to speed up the process of improvement. If you only practice in real time when it's currently a challenge, you will make progress, but it'll feel slow. It'll feel slow, being fully transparent. What you can do if you have this overwhelm and shutdown pattern is you can start to condition yourself to stay on rather than shutting down through something called stress inoculation. Now, this is something that I chose to do because, like I said, I was at war with this pattern. I hit that threshold and I said, I need to pour my attention into resolving this because it is keeping me from happiness, success, prosperity. Every bit of joy I want in my life is being stolen by this pattern. And so I went to war with it. Now, stress inoculation is essentially, if we're going to simplify it down, it's basically putting yourself into the stressed state or experience that you normally end up in, but putting yourself there on purpose and then practicing bringing yourself out of it. So it's basically causing yourself stress so that you can learn how to properly handle it when you're not actually in a situation that's stressful. Example. There's a couple different things that I would do to put myself in a state of overwhelm physically so that I could train my body to come out of it or to be okay instead of shutting down. The first thing that I would do is I would do cold exposure. Cold exposure can be as simple as stepping in a cold shower, going outside when it's cold, maybe without a jacket, or if you're a crazy person like me, jumping in a pool during the winter. And this was Brian's push and idea, but the theory was, let's put you in a total state of overwhelm where your body's physically overwhelmed and you start to panic. And then, because we know logically you're safe, we'll work on calming down. And that was what the theory was in my brain. And Brian agreed with me. So it wasn't just me doing this by myself. But
I started doing it first.
But every day, I put myself into that state of complete, overwhelming, almost panic stress. In a safe environment, I'd jump in our pool.
It was about 40 degrees.
And it was about 40 degrees in the pool, which is very, very cold. If you have never been in 40-degree water, it is just the coldest water you can imagine. And so your body goes into a state of panic. But I worked on this every day, just being like, you're safe. It's okay. It's okay. Breathe, breathe, breathe. And I would bring my heart rate down, get my body calm. And over time, what do you know? Anytime I would start to get in a state of stress physically, and I felt my heart rate speed up, I felt my breathing speed up, I had trained myself to be able to come down faster, de-escalate, let your body know you're safe, you're good, stay on. And just by experiencing that stress consistently outside of the moment where I needed to calm down, it basically built the muscle. That's really what it did, is it built the muscle of being able to manage that stress in a very productive way. That totally accelerated the process. So do you need to jump in a cold plunge? Not necessarily, but you could also do things like Tumo breathing. We have like a power breathing meditation that we can link below for you, but you can do things like Tumo breathing. Wim Hof breathing is also what it's called, but basically that's where you put your body into a state of stress by essentially hyperventilating, and then you bring yourself back down, and it trains you to be able to handle that stress. So there's a lot of different safe ways to do it. Again, it's called stress inoculation, but that's something that I did to speed up the process of breaking the pattern, and it worked beautifully. Even though it was challenging, it literally changed my life.
So the key is understanding that if you want to change this, it's not a one-time fix. It's that every time it happens, you're improving. And the best way to improve it is to set yourself up beforehand. So stress inoculation is one way that you can condition. You can also prime yourself positively, right? If you know you're going to have an overwhelming day, start with journaling, start with some breathing, start with a gratitude practice, get a workout, do something that calms you down or puts you in a peak state, because how you start the day will also impact the rest of the day.
True.
But if you start the day and you're feeling overwhelmed and you do not change your state, you're going to feel that way for the rest of the day. You're going to carry that energy over. So if you start recognizing it at a 4, hey, that's a good sign that I need to do some digging. I need to do some research on myself. I need to close some tabs, or I need to clarify what the most important thing is. You also want to start identifying the problem at a 4 or a 6 so that you can move away from it, right? It's so important to recognize it. So yes, you can put yourself in a state of stress and recognize it. The pool, the cold exposure is the fastest route. You can do it in your shower, right? Put the shower on, stand in the cold water, feel it for a minute to 2 minutes and find peace, or find a way to control yourself. And the more you practice, the easier it gets. You can sit in a meditation and imagine all the stressful things, and then say, "Oh, we're coming back." Right? The more we practice this, the easier it gets. But these are the steps, and you can do it. Right? You have the capacity, you have the power, because you are a human, and humans are cool because we can always change. Right? So if you identify why it's worth you changing, why it's a must, then you start practicing, you're going to get better. So on that note, we hope this has been helpful. We hope you've gained something. And our encouragement is, if you are the person who is experiencing overwhelm, let us know what you took away. And also, if you're someone who knows that you need some support with breaking this pattern, feel free to share this podcast and this episode with someone that you need support from. Bringing them into the fold is so helpful. I don't think I would have had the capacity or the tools to help Lindsay if, one, I wasn't already a coach, had I not had mentors in myself that helped me with my own patterns, and three, I was there when she was going through the lessons, right? I was there experiencing it with her when she was at the mastermind, when she was at the seminar. So I got to see it in real time, and I got to have a sense of empathy for what she was going through. So maybe this would be a helpful podcast and lesson to send to your partner or your business partner, the person who you need help from, and we encourage you to do that. So anything you would add, Linz?
And the biggest thing is trust that on the other side is a world where you never shut down. You never find yourself feeling useless or helpless or like there's nothing you can do to turn yourself back on or re-energize yourself. There is a world that exists that you never hit that point on a regular, consistent basis, if ever. Granted, extremes. So look forward to that. Go to war with this pattern and trust that there is such a better you on the other side. If you just practice it and you go to war with this pattern, you will get there. So with that, we hope this is helpful. Now go out and conquer your day.
Cheers.